Welcome to the Deep Dive Books channel, where we hope you find something valuable every day.
Let's continue discussing Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point. This is the final part of our interpretation. In this book, Gladwell explains three mechanisms of social engineering: overstory, critical threshold, and super spreaders. Social change often arises from these mechanisms, sometimes through their combined effects. For this final lecture, let's explore the overstory on a larger scale. In German, there's a term called Zeitgeist, which refers to the overstory that dominates the culture of a nation or society during a specific historical period. For example, in Chinese films from the 1950s, scenes of large factories belching black smoke were portrayed with pride. Today, people see such scenes and immediately think of air pollution, but at the time, they symbolized industrialization and progress in China. Over 20 years ago, university students aspired to work for multinational corporations for high salaries. A decade ago, becoming a programmer at an internet company and earning stock options was the envy of many. Now, those are stories of the past, even subjects of ridicule. Programmers are now associated with grueling 996 work schedules and the looming 35-year-old crisis, while fresh graduates dream only of securing stable jobs in state-owned enterprises. The zeitgeist changes over time. Sometimes, these changes are obvious. Other times, they occur subtly, almost imperceptibly. By the time people notice, the overstory has already shifted. This phenomenon is fascinating and explains why significant social transformations often seem to take people by surprise. For instance, just weeks before the October Revolution in 1917, Lenin believed a massive revolution in Russia was a distant prospect and doubted he'd live to see it. On the eve of the Soviet Union's collapse, Gorbachev was preparing to relax control over satellite states. Meanwhile, Václav Havel, who would later become the president of the Czech Republic, had lost hope and lamented his nation's reliance on external powers, saying, "It seems we never learn." Gladwell's insight is this: the reason people fail to anticipate upheavals isn't the lack of signs, but their inability to recognize them. By then, the overstory has already shifted. How do new overstory emerge? Gladwell examines two key cases: how the Holocaust narrative entered mainstream consciousness, and how same-sex marriage became legalized. The systematic extermination of Jews by the Nazis, known in English as the Holocaust, with a capital H, is now synonymous with the darkest chapter of human history. It is widely discussed, with multiple Holocaust memorials across the United States. However, many may not realize that the Holocaust narrative wasn't widely known immediately after World War II. Consider this chart showing the use of the term Holocaust in media. The term only gained prominence after 1978. Furthermore, it wasn't just about terminology. World War II ended in 1945, but it wasn't until 1961 that the U.S. had its first Holocaust memorial. Even then, discussions about the Holocaust were sparse. History books from the 1960s and 1970s offered minimal details about Nazi concentration camps or the systemic murder of Jews. Some historians noted Hitler's order to execute over 6 million civilians, but the accounts were brief and lacked detail. In the 1950s, Broadway staged a play titled The Diary of Anne Frank. We now know Anne's story well. About a Jewish girl who hid with her family during the Holocaust, before dying in a concentration camp. Yet, astonishingly, the play never explicitly identified Anne as Jewish, referring to her only as a German girl. Even among Jews, the Holocaust was rarely discussed. Survivors often avoided speaking about their experiences in concentration camps, even with their own children. In Israel, references to the camps were vague, using terms like Nazi atrocities or horrors, and even adopting Nazi terminology like the final solution, while avoiding the word Holocaust. Why is that? At the time, the Jewish community sought to reshape its overstory. After World War II, the American Jewish Committee convened scholars to study why Jews faced such hatred in Europe. Their conclusion: Jews had appeared too weak. To counter this, they emphasized stories of Jewish heroism. The image of Jews passively lining up for slaughter was seen as a profound humiliation. For Holocaust survivors, the stigma ran deep. One man, whose parents were killed in concentration camps, moved to the U.S., married another survivor, and had children. When their child's school hosted a family event, they felt shame that their child had no grandparents. There had long been suggestions to build a Holocaust memorial in New York, but the American Jewish Committee rejected the proposal 3 times, in 1946, 1947, and 1948 at different occasions. They did not want to display the shameful memory for the public to see. Let's take a closer look today. Perhaps the Jewish community at the time lacked confidence. It takes a lot of confidence to have the courage to expose past wounds. However, humanity needs to confront history. Only by understanding the terrible things people are capable of in specific circumstances can we learn from history and prevent such scenarios from recurring. Maybe what followed should have been that, decades later, when the Jewish people had enough courage, the Holocaust would be openly discussed. But by then, it would have been too late. People would no longer be interested. Yet history didn't unfold that way. Starting in 1978, the Holocaust suddenly became a mainstream topic. The reason? Television. At the time, NBC aired a miniseries simply titled Holocaust. This was also when the term Holocaust came to specifically refer to the Nazi genocide. The series told the story of a Jewish family in Berlin and portrayed the scenes of mass killings in concentration camps from a ground-level perspective. The content was so shocking to contemporary audiences that even the actors found it hard to believe these events truly happened. Spanning over 9 hours, and broadcast over 4 consecutive nights, the series was watched by 120 million Americans. Some Jewish viewers were outraged, calling it an insult to Jewish people. But as World War II had only ended a little over 30 years prior, many survivors were still alive, and the topic quickly sparked widespread discussion. The Jewish community finally began to confront the Holocaust openly. A year later, in 1979, Holocaust was broadcast in Germany. Germans were equally shocked. Many Germans admitted that this was the first time they truly understood what the so-called final solution to the Jewish question actually entailed. At the time, some former SS officers were still alive. Some felt so guilty that they contemplated suicide. One former officer said his wife and 4 children had watched the second episode and started calling him Old Nazi, and they have since abandoned him. Originally, the statute of limitations for prosecuting war criminals in Germany was about to expire. However, following the series airing, the German parliament abolished the statute of limitations, mandating lifelong accountability for Holocaust crimes. People's perceptions changed almost overnight. This is the power of overstory. Or, more specifically, television. Today, people may not feel as strongly about television, since many no longer watch it. With the rise of new media, everyone follows different programs. But before the advent of the internet, especially in an era with only a handful of TV channels, the whole nation would tune in to watch the same show. When an entire population collectively watches a story, seeing how the characters behave and interact, what does this signify? It implies that people silently assume that this is how society should operate. Think about it. For instance, if I were a child from a mountain village who had never seen how urbanites lived, and I watched a TV series where city folks were all white-collar workers drinking coffee, using computers, and commuting by car, I would naturally conclude that this is what modern life looks like, right? If the TV show depicted men and women in equal relationships, or even female leaders in companies, I would believe that gender equality is the norm in cities. Without television, I would simply assume that my village's rules were universal. Television has the power to shape social norms. Studies have shown that in the past, Americans held very different views on racial issues, such as whether students of different races should attend the same schools, or whether interracial marriages should be banned. Opinions varied among liberals, conservatives, and moderates. However, people who regularly watched television tended to develop more consistent views over time. Larry Gross, a professor of communication at the University of Southern California, noted, "It's the media creating the cultural consciousness about how the world works and what the rules are." Scottish writer, Andrew Fletcher, famously said, "If I can write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes their laws." However, television's ability to change perceptions isn't as simple as direct propaganda. It's not about repeating a message 100 times, like men and women are equal, for people to believe it. You must make people genuinely accept it. Here's an insight I find particularly fascinating, offered by Bonnie Dow, a communication professor at Vanderbilt University, who has a keen observation about television. Television doesn't tell you what to think. It teaches you how to think. My interpretation is that, for people to accept a new idea, television must portray it as a normal part of everyday life. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, there were many so-called feminist TV shows in the U.S. emphasizing gender equality. These shows featured strong female characters who were career-driven, highly capable, and successful. But according to Dow, these shows didn't lead audiences to truly embrace feminism. Why not? These female characters shared common traits. They were older, single, white, heterosexual, and too busy with their careers to date, marry, or have children. While they were portrayed positively and evoked sympathy, viewers still felt such women were abnormal. Sympathy doesn't equate to acceptance. Similarly, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, some American TV shows featured gay characters, but these portrayals didn't foster much empathy for the LGBTQ+ community. Dow observed 3 implicit rules governing these portrayals. 1. Gay characters could never be central figures. They were always supporting characters. 2. Their gay identity was their defining trait. All their storylines revolved around their sexual orientation, and people either opposed or sympathized with them based on this aspect. 3. Gay characters were always isolated, never interacting with other gay characters. Think about the implications. Gay individuals were depicted as a tiny, marginalized, and stereotyped minority. While audiences might sympathize with their plight, they wouldn't see them as normal people. Then came NBC's Will and Grace, which aired from 1998 to 2006, and reshaped the narrative around gay individuals in America. It was one of the highest-rated sitcoms of its time. The show revolved around the lives of 2 friends, Grace, a straight interior designer, and Will, a gay lawyer, along with their friends. Will was one of the central characters, and had a boyfriend, but his sexual orientation wasn't the focus. The show depicted Will as a witty, successful, and lovable individual. He loved and was loved, had great relationships with those around him, and just happened to be gay. For the first time in television history, a gay character was portrayed as a well-rounded, normal person, not reduced to a stereotype. Viewers saw Will as a multifaceted individual with strengths and flaws, much like their own friends. This was a turning point for how Americans perceived LGBTQ+ individuals. Over the next decade, as Will and Grace subtly influenced society, states across the U.S. gradually legalized same-sex marriage. Whether or not you're willing to accept this responsibility, cultural works have the power to shape social norms. This concludes The Tipping Point's Revenge. Malcolm Gladwell repeatedly discusses social engineering, yet most of the social changes he describes were not deliberate efforts. Those involved may have simply gone with the flow. But the underlying truth is that society can change. And inevitably will. What we revere today may seem ridiculous tomorrow. Those marginalized today may redefine your understanding tomorrow. While no one can dictate how others should live, you can always exert influence. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.